Do not want to hold us up. 10:30.
All right. Okay. Back in session. We're at the Downtown Mall Pedestrian Safety Project. Allocation of $100,000 for threat and risk assessment. First of one reading.
Evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here this evening on the allocation of the Downtown Mall Pedestrian
Paul, could
Safety.
you introduce yourself?
Yes, I can. Paul Oberdorfer, Public Works Director. I'm here this evening on the Downtown Mall Pedestrian Safety Project. This is an outcome of the August 12th events of last year. Since then, we provided quite a bit of safety services for large events that take place at the pavilion as well as downtown. Events as many as 5 people, upwards of several thousand people. Public Service has gone out and provided traffic control and additional safety resources. And in doing such, what we've come to understand is there are some vulnerabilities on the downtown mall and surrounding access points with the bollard designs that are currently in place. They're more visual in nature, a barrier, than they are anything that would protect the pedestrians. And so what we're proposing is to fund a $100,000 study for a threat and risk assessment on the downtown mall. This would include any access points, both mall crossings, vehicle and pedestrian counts around both Water Street, Market Street, Bridge McIntyre, and the surrounding areas, so that we can have the consultant determine what the proper risk assessment would be and put together a risk matrix for us to decide what the best solutions would be, both architecturally and engineering, to protect the public.
Okay.
Just
Any question?
I didn't have a question, I had a comment. Just really want to thank you for the work on this. I think this threat assessment will the risk assessment will definitely bode well and turn up some good stuff for our community. So I'm wholeheartedly in favor.
Madam Mayor, I have a couple questions. I've conveyed this to Mr. Jones before. So I think it's a really good idea. I'm wanting to know more about this very round figure of $100,000, where it comes from, how it's derived. I mean, it seems to me that, having done, worked with a lot of consulting firms in different capacities and seen them, and including in this role, that I'm not clear on the amount of work that goes toward that cost figure for this report that needs to be done, and why it wouldn't be 25. What's the basis for somebody coming in for, if they're going to be here for, it looks to me like you could do a lot of this analysis and site visit in not that long of a period of time. It just seems quite expensive, and I would like more information on how we got to that figure.
Absolutely. So the consultant that would be providing the threat and risk assessment is actually a sub-consultant to a consultant that we have on contract currently. And it's a specialized field that has a lot of risk involved itself, and what they put forth is in terms of their remediation. And so it's one of those areas where the consultant themselves are taking on quite a bit of risk in what they present in terms of their actual outcomes in engineering solutions.
I don't understand that. What does that mean, that they're taking on risk?
Liability insurance?
Liability, yeah.
Okay.
So they're taking on all the liability for the engineering firm that would actually do the design.
But I thought we're only funding, the first one is threat and risk assessment.
Correct.
It's not architectural and engineering design.
Correct.
What's
So
the
they-
liability?
So the liability is that they create the risk profile for the engineering firm that creates the solutions. And so through all their investigation, they're the ones that determine what the Department of Homeland Security threat assessment levels will be. So they'll have 5 different levels, and through those different categories, they'll have different bollard systems that would meet impact resistance, whether it's a vehicle like a car or a truck or a fully loaded truck. So they have to take into consideration all the information and intel that they can gather, which is quite a bit that we do have, and kind of mash all that together to come up with a formula or a matrix that said, if you want to have this level of security, this is what we would recommend that you do. Then we would have the other consultant, the engineering consultant, actually design that work.
So it doesn't, it's more information. It doesn't exactly answer my question. I mean, it's expensive because they have an insurance premium, or they have?
It's accepting full liability and the insurance that goes along with it. So it would be a default. The engineering firm is basically going to take the risk assessment. They're going to design that according to whatever the outcomes are on the Department of Homeland Security standards that are pretty concrete for this type of an application. So the actual engineering firm is not really the one that would be held accountable should something go wrong in the future. All the liability would be shifted to the firm that actually does the assessment. So if there's any gaps in their assessment, they would be the one that would ultimately be probably held liable.
So if they do the assessment and we implement some of the proposals, then if they're allowable in the future from our implementation, is that what you're?
Well, it would be through the court. If there was some, let's say some claim, it would go back to, was it an engineering issue or was it something deeper within the design? And if it's a design element that was an outcome of the study that they had done, I'll give you an example. Let's say they recommend putting a certain bollard that would keep a pickup truck driving at 25 miles an hour on Fifth Street from going through the bollards. And their study says this is what you need at that location, when in reality, there's a pretty good stretch of road that a fully loaded truck, commercial vehicle could get through and get into the pedestrian traffic. So they need to provide those specific metrics of safety so that we can make, I guess, decisions based on the menu of options and costs before we go into the engineering phase.
So the planning that you all are doing, that you've been doing for the past 6 weeks or so, how does this tie in to that?
Well, first we had a very basic assessment that was done back in October of last year. So that has informed us as we're moving forward on this as well. And this is just one part of that. This is a longer term issue. This won't be solved in the next 2 or 3 months. This will take a while for us to get the assessment back and then also to implement the recommendations of it. In the meantime, as Mr. Oberdorfer mentioned earlier, we've taken other steps to help secure the mall for right now. But we do believe that we'll need additional steps that need to be taken to secure it in a way that doesn't feel, like we're doing it and just to get by. That we're taking a very serious look at this for long-term solutions to addressing safety. Now that Charlottesville's become one of those cities that's been affected by a vehicular attack, like you've seen in other places around the country and around the world.
And you
But
referenced,
it's hard to plan, like for those kind of what ifs. And how, this seems like a steep price tag for what ifs. And we also know that when people are planning to commit acts of violence like that, they are usually going around what is in place to figure that out. And I'm back to how do we plan, but also not impede on citizens day to day? I think, is this not a part?
That's an important question that we always have to answer when we're talking about security. Whether it's security on the downtown mall, security in City Hall, security anywhere. We have to find that right balance between what's necessary to protect people, but then also ensuring that an area remains open and has a certain environment or certain atmosphere that would, not feel like you're behind bars, and that you're in a prison setting or a high security setting. versus wanting to keep people safe? And that's a very good question to ask. I'm not sure if we have those answers for you tonight. We have to have that as part of a discussion with the community as we come back with any sort of recommendations for moving forward.
I do have a question too, when you're done.
Is this the only way to get this assessment done?
I think in a thorough manner, yes.
And, yes, my question relates to then, would this be involving the BAR in some way to make sure that whatever is being proposed is also compatible with the downtown mall?
That's correct. They'll be working with all the stakeholder groups up front.
Okay.
It would be the elected body, any of the commissions, the business owners, the staff, and using that as part of their discovery phase. And so that would be the first point of interaction before we got into any engineering that would impact, obviously, the aesthetics of the mall. In the interim, this would also identify some short gap or some gaps that we have currently that exist down on the mall, and provide some opportunities to fix those before we look at a fiscal year 20 CIP project.
And if I may, just because I want to make sure I'm understanding where this cost is coming from and why it is as much as it is. So I'm an architect. I understand my professional liability insurance is based on my design. It's drawing. It doesn't look like it's that much, but if I've drawn something and didn't size something right and it goes wrong, I could be getting sued for that design flaw, even though it was executed exactly to the drawings. So this is the same situation where this is the designer and they are proposing this design. And so much of my fee is professional liability insurance, but so it's really the lawyers in the room that are causing all the price inflation. But I'm serious, but this is what this is all about.
Well, there's actually three components. So you have the actual threat and risk assessment itself, some pedestrian and vehicle counts. So you have the cost for those sensors, the time to take all that data and compile it, and then the third piece would be the markup from the prime consultant,
Okay.
Who is the prime consultant?
Timmons.
So the gaps that we already know exist, we need this assessment to tell us what to do with those?
Yeah, and I can put it into context. I mean, as a layperson, I could go out and say, throw some planters up. The spacing should be no more than 6 feet so a vehicle can't get through it. But that puts myself at professional liability risk, and I'm not an expert. And if something happened to somebody, number one, I would never forgive myself. And so I think this is the appropriate means to protect the public, to provide or actually to identify the interface between the vehicular traffic and the pedestrian traffic, and what measures that we have that we can introduce that would afford better protection. It doesn't mean necessarily fortification, but certainly monitoring that interface so that people are protected.
So what else could we possibly be talking about besides the street, like street closures or barricades or something like that?
So you have, you mean in addition to the mall?
No, well, so this is outside.
No, this is all the mall
Yeah.
and the alleyways that abut the mall. So you have quite a few access points. This would address both active and passive bollard systems that may be required in the future for emergency, police and fire to get in, as well as planters. That also would address the 2nd and 4th Street crossings, doing vehicle and pedestrian counts, and to give us a better understanding of what risk we have with having those set up. Leaving them open the way that we close them currently when we have events. Are there better ways for us to close them? Again, I'm a traffic control person. I'm not really an event specialist that deals with the parameters that we had last summer. So this would give us a better sense of the things that we're doing currently that work well and the things that we need to improve upon, as well as future long-term capital improvements.
And my question was around scope, and you think you alluded to it. So it's the downtown mall and any of those short streets that lead into the mall. So
That's
basically
correct.
from Water Street to Market Street.
Correct.
Pavilion to Omni.
Correct. And outside of that, as part of their study, if there were any traffic impacts, they would do traffic modeling around the entire area. So it would even help us with currently when we have events, we shut down 4th Street, you know, what traffic impacts do we have and can we adapt signal timing to help alleviate some of that?
Oh, wow, okay. It'll be that far-reaching and
It's pretty
comprehensive.
progressive, yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Does this get bid out? Are we approving? How is that?
So under the current way we procured this was we used Timmons Group under our current engineering contract, and then they subconsult this work for the threat and risk assessment. There's really,
This it just feels like we're missing one step here. It feels like we should see some, facts and basis for the cost. And it's
An
very
hourly
anecdotal
breakdown.
what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, it just feels.
so I can tell you their hourly fees versus general engineering and architecture are probably twice what the going rate is.
But this is all very anecdotal. I mean, it seems to me like with this amount of money, given how much we fight about smaller amounts of money, which we ought to see a proposal where we would, especially if it's a no bid basis, that we would just look at something. And I asked for this last week, that we would just see. Maybe I'm being too much of a stickler, but it just seems like we should see something that would.
If I may ask, so you're asking for a scope?
No, a basis for why it costs $100,000 with a budget. That, what's the part of it that is attributable to liability concerns? What's the part of it that's the markup you said that goes to prime? What's the part of it that's, what's the hourly basis? How many people are going to work on it? What's the amount of time? I mean, just seems like with this amount of money, we should see something with some more detail in it.
So typically they would do an hourly breakdown, when they did the scope of services, but because of the general nature of this and trying to keep the cost contained, we did as a lump sum. So we agreed on a lump sum not to exceed amount. Otherwise, we could have scope.
And I
creep.
guess I'm coming from, there was a lot of contracting like this that is done when there are security concerns. I mean, this is like the whole world of post 9/11. Tons of people made tons of money, and they were very round figure contracts preying on the fears. There's a lot of this happening with, in my other day job, the privacy concerns, this big EU regulation, lots of consultants charging lots of money, and it just feels like we ought to. I mean, we could put it on the consent agenda if we just saw an actual proposal with some facts in it that would explain why it's this amount of money rather than this suspiciously round figure that.
It's probably suspiciously round because I rounded it up to 100,000. It was 98,000 and change, and with some contingency for the traffic counts. Yeah,
I mean, I may be out.
and I apologize. That was something that I did.
It just
but I
seems like,
didn't-
with our fiscal practice, we would generally see more facts.
I think certainly for larger projects, when we're dealing with the West Main Street project, we saw that, but this is actually a very small project, and we have granted consulting contracts to NDS to do community engagement. Which without requiring the facilitator to give an exact scope to us, because it is a purview of staff, and I just think that, for me personally, I think Mr. Oberdorfer has provided clarification that I can accept, but that's, everyone is different, and I don't know if, Chief Baxter is here, if there's anything that he might want to add too, but I just, in terms of how this fits into the whole picture of our safety and preparedness plan.
And my question is of the presentation that you gave earlier, of all those people that are sitting around the table coming up with a plan for the future and management of potential events, is the only reason this company is needed because of liability? Because doesn't the city, or is there some other?
There's subject matter expertise involved in this, and again, I mean, I would not ask somebody in our facilities development to actually be an architect if they're not an architect and have a license and design things. And we've run into these similar situations where, you know, you pay a professional engineer for their stamp or an architect for their license, and in this case, you know, it's an expensive task to ask somebody to take on the liability of providing, and given the concerns of last year and the probability of something happening again, they're taking on a pretty significant risk. And so that's why I feel that their hourly fees are as high as they are. When I looked at them, I thought they were high, but upon further investigation with other consulting firms, are pretty much in line with that particular line of work. So if we could shop around, we'll probably come up with the same thing. The biggest or the most important thing with Timmons Group was the fact that they had worked with these professionals before. There's insurance issues between them with them being a subcontractor. So it was a comfort level for Timmons to work outside their realm of going into public safety in terms of this kind of an element.
So I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we, as City Council, allocate the $100,000 needed for the downtown mall pedestrian safety project.
A second.
I'm going to reiterate my concerns. I think that we owe it to the public and to ourselves with an amount this, and that's new. I mean, it's not like the $50,000 that's allocated small area plan, or 25, I think it was, or whatever it was that it's taken forever to actually be spent. There's no rationale here, and it just feels not. I just feel like there's one step that we're missing, and it would just take 2 weeks. But I understand there's a motion in a second, but I'm gonna not vote for it.
Okay, so vote. It carries 3-2. All right.
Nakaya and Mike on the same side.
For different reasons.
Who said that?
Wes. It's all right. All right, so now we're Land Bank Corporation Ordinance, second of 2 readings, and Ms. Kelly is going to come.
Good evening. For the record, Brenda Kelly, Redevelopment Manager. At your April 16th City Council meeting, this item was on the agenda for first reading, and you had requested some revisions to the ordinance. Those are spelled out on your first item on your agenda memo cover page, the specific items you requested the ordinance be revised. And also, as you may recall, there was some discussion about recommended guiding principles from the community in the HAC. And you had also asked that if or when this ordinance was approved, that within 3 months of the adoption of the ordinance, staff would be back with additional guiding principle items for discussion for an agenda item. So those are not included at this time, but staff is cognizant that you had asked for those to be brought back in front of you for discussion. So I am happy to answer any questions or go into more detail about the revisions that were made. Mr. Duranzio, Chair of the HAC, is also here tonight if you have any questions for him.
So I do have a question for Ms. Kelly. So, Ms. Kelly, so the guiding principles, is that basically what we got from the one proposed set of guiding principles came from the Housing Advisory Committee, May 20th. So that's the kind of the content you're talking about?
Correct. That was staff's understanding that you had asked for that to be brought back in front of you.
So we don't talk about that tonight necessarily, or do we?
We do not.
Okay.
This is the ordinance, which is the city enabling legislation to create the Land Bank Corporation.
Thank you.
So, go ahead.
No, I know that there's been some communications that came from the Low Income Housing Committee, Coalition, excuse me. And then the HAC has responded to that, so I just want to make sure my colleagues were kind of aware of those suggestions. So, because it was during the HAC meeting last week when this letter was for the letter from the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition was presented, and then it was discussed among the Housing Advisory Committee what alignment they had with that letter, as well as just some of the language, and that was what's summarized in the letter from Mr. Duranzio earlier today. And I'm happy to, if you want to share a summary of that, it's up to you.
Phil Duranzio, Chair of the HAC. Thank you very much. As Vice Mayor Hill pointed out, on the 16th, which was our last full HAC meeting, the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition presented a draft of the letter that was forwarded on to you, and we reviewed it as a body. And after some discussion, moved to provide the council with some of our thoughts on it. They had 3 bullet points, and I can see that Emily Dreyfus is here from there, and she may wish to address that. Maybe she's not. No, she moved on me. To address the specifics of that, and they made 3 points, one of having to do with that sort of circled around, if you recall, the conversation about the right of first refusal as being a tool to sort of prioritize affordable housing as a loudspeaker or trumpet for that idea. Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition asked for that council sort of direct very specifically the city manager develop a protocol for prioritizing housing, and I'll let Ms. Dreyfus speak to that. And the HAC is in general agreement with that. That letter also that they sent to you, and again, I certainly don't want to put words in their mouth, asked to memorialize certain directives into the ordinance about prioritizing housing and mandating that the land bank be restricted to engaging with either the CRHA or other or local nonprofits for in their transactions, and to specifically define affordable housing and point the land bank to prioritize based on that specific definition. And first, while the HAC would have been happy to memorialize various things inside the ordinance, and there was sort of a long discussion about what goes in and what doesn't, but if we are going to put something like that in, the HAC is of the opinion that we need a broader and more flexible definition. Originally, we had suggested that if to place into the ordinance a definition of affordable housing or a direction to the Land Bank Board to use Housing Policy 1 as their priority, as the current policy, until such time as the city developed another one under its comprehensive strategy, and then flip to that. So if that's going to go, if there is going to be made a change to the ordinance to put it inside the ordinance, that is, however, still the HAC's advice for a guidance document in the absence of putting it in there. So those are the issues that were addressed in that letter. And then just briefly to the ordinance itself, and I apologize for the sort of 11th hour over the transom firing of my comments on that, and I hope you all received them. Really gets down to some sort of very fine, granular technical details. I was traveling about the composition of the board, and I think it's sort of a difference of hearing from what council wanted. And I'm not sure if you've got that document, that second document. It's a one-pager.
Not the letter that you sent?
No.
Oh.
Second, I can. I have a few copies. It's, you know, it is uncharacteristically short. And it just points out a couple of minor distinctions, which I'm happy to provide. Yes. So.
You need to see that too, probably.
And essentially, what we're addressing was the update that Ms. Kelly provided to you based on, and I think this was her hearing versus my hearing on this. So I'm certainly willing to be corrected to this, but in the definition of one of the board members, the guidance was one of the members were to be an expert in the city. Staff presented it as an expert in real estate, finance, development, or finance as the subject matter expert. And the hack just said, pick a subject matter expert, because in the future, we're not going to be clear on what that subject matter may be. And that may be able to change. And it was my understanding that the council was more in alignment with that. So that was the change. That's the one change to the board, just changing it from subject matter expert to from expert in real estate development or finance. Then I believe the change this is not reflected in the ordinance. But I recall that Mr. Jones and I had a conversation about the terms of the board members, of the officers on the board, and staggering those or not. And sort of a consensus that to let the board figure out how long to have their president, vice president, and other officers serve. And just as that was the simplest way to do it based on their membership and how it was going to work out, and just have them write it into the bylaws themselves. And that was, I thought that had been sort of a consensus that followed Mr. Jones and I sort of spontaneously deciding that was brilliant between us. And that's essentially it. I did have a footnote here, which I actually had a chance to discuss with Ms. Kelly, which is the first one regarding this initial board, which the comment is still in there. And on reading of reading the underlying legislation, in that it seems to be mirroring the Virginia Non-Stock Corporation Act, we might actually have to have a board of 2 that is enumerated in the ordinance so that we're allowed to have directors. But I'll leave that up to. Because if we form it as a non-stock corporation, the people who actually sign the paperwork have to be directors. You need 2 of them. And my suggestion was that's simply, well, if you're going to approve a board, then 2 of them are going to be Mr. Jones or his designate, and somebody else up here. You pick them when they sign the paperwork, and that's their job is done as the initial board. Those were the distinctions. But as I said, granular in the extreme. And again, I apologize for getting them so late to you. I was out of town until Sunday.
I'm just not sure I could process anything that you just said.
Okay.
I just want to be able to vote on an ordinance. Okay.
So, but those were the different. If it sounds like that we're picking gnats out of black pepper, it's only because we are.
Well,
And I mean, I've been to a number of meetings on this beyond just the Housing Advisory Committee, but meeting with different stakeholder groups, and I think even Ms. Robertson had weighed in, and just, I'm worried if we get to a point where it's not receptive for everyone to think, like, well, why are we even bothering with this? Like, Are we already have all the mechanisms in place? What is this really accomplishing? And so
I'm there.
that's the question that I have at this
I've
point
been there.
after the endless meetings.
Right.
So what's the answer to that?
Why should it exist?
Yes.
So,
Damn, Kai.
What? That is the question. Was that not?
well, I mean, I can provide an justify its existence. If you're going to, if you're going to form a land bank, the idea would be that since we are not in a neighborhood, we are not in an area of surrounded by, we're not dealing with blight, which is what sort of the first and second generation of land banks were for, that were very good for taking title to property, cleaning them up, holding on to them, selling them off to developers, fixing a tax-based problem. That is not what Charlottesville really needs. What it needs is as many tools as it can possibly have in its toolbox to address affordable housing. So this thing is designed to be pointed in the direction of affordable housing. Having said that, what is it useful for? It is useful as a partnering tool that is that is flexible and agile, and that if you, as a nonprofit, separate from the city, separate from CRHA, separate from the other stakeholders, it can take title, it can clear title, and it can partner with these entities to move things towards in the proper direction of development, to hold properties that might otherwise need to be held. Yes, sir.
But to a certain extent, that sounds like duplication of what the housing authority has the ability to do.
Except that the housing authority apparently either isn't or can't, and it's not to say that it shouldn't do that, but it also does that for its own developmental purposes, and it's not meant to be a competitor. What it's meant to be
But
is
as this
a
is
supplement.
constructed, is written, I mean, it's hard pressed for me to believe that as this is constructed, and even as I'm hearing the jargon in regards to how you're describing it, for it not to sound like a competitor of the housing authority, and I thought that's not what we want to create here.
Right. Well, as presented in the guidance document, it says you're not a competitor, you need to work as a partner. The
Correct.
HAC's original intention was to put in the ordinance, you do not compete with the CRHA.
But it's not in here.
Well, that was the HAC's original recommendation, the HAC's presentation.
Right.
In further consultation with staff and Ms. Robertson, who expressed an interest in designing an ordinance that stood up the entity, and that's what it's to do. And then how exactly it functions as government is the thing for the bylaws, and that's something that you should give direction to. If you want to put that material in there, we presented it and we have it, and that's in the letter that I provided to you, that you can
Yeah.
put that in there. It says you must work with the CRHA or another.
I just think
first.
it's a great deal of information to add now. I mean,
So,
just me personally, I don't.
yes, sir, the
feel
information
comfortable. I think we should
in that
delay
letter
because-
is from the point of view what the HAC put into the deal, is actually a cut and paste from the recommendation that it was on the last.
Oh, this isn't. It's not quite a cut and paste from the last recommendation.
From the recommendation they made that was not adopted in the ordinance.
Right. So,
Right.
in my opinion, if I'm just being frank, and Phil, I have the utmost respect for you, but
Right.
this sounds kind of underhanded. Like you didn't get it during the last meeting.
Oh, no.
So now we're putting it in.
Let
now,
me,
but that's how it appears.
right, so let me be clear on this. The HAC's recommendation as for last week, from the last month, stands. You need a guidance document that describes all of this, that describes what you want to do.
Right.
If you are going to entertain in the ordinance, giving it instructions on how to behave and mandating those instructions in the ordinance, if you are going to entertain that at the request of the Charlottesville Low-Income Housing Coalition, and put this very clear stricture on what affordable housing is and how that's going to work. What the HAC as a whole is saying is that language really binds up the land bank in a way that we don't think it'd be as useful as using what we originally thought would be good language for that. So it's not a new thing. It's
Right.
saying if you're going to go down that road to define what affordable housing is and give in the ordinance, use the definition that we came up with.
Has Click had the opportunity to review this document?
No, because I wrote it this afternoon.
Right.
But,
So how in good conscience would it, so I'm just speaking to you now.
Right.
In good conscience, would it be fair for me to make a decision on a document that none of your partners or none of the other individuals have been able to see or provide comment on, or said, maybe they may say, hey, we like some of this stuff, but no
So-
one else has seen it yet,
Right,
not
well,
even city staff.
Yes, and what I would say to you is every word of the recommendation in that letter that the HAC made is in the recommendations from 416. And we also said, we originally wanted this in the ordinance, but we were asked to pull it back to simplify the ordinance. But if you're going to reopen that door and put this stuff back into the ordinance, this was the language that we suggested. So it's not it's not being, we're not trying to be underhanded about it or being at all sneaky about it. You know, in a public meeting, we discussed that this was what the language was going to be and what we were going to use. The only question is that I was traveling and I did not get back until Sunday evening and did not actually throw this out, for which I take a certain amount of responsibility and should have, you know, sort of toughed it out at 10:30 at night on Sunday, just thrown it out.
Did we decide that we were reopening it? What's the?
Well, that was the other question. No. I mean,
No.
not that I know of.
So-
No.
so
I'm not
this is done,
suggesting-
Because we all love, but we thought we made a decision
Yeah,
about
yeah,
this.
and
so it's
I
being
wasn't suggesting that you do.
But we made a decision
Right.
about these
So
things.
we
didn't
voted on it at the first, we had a first reading.
Right.
And at one point it was discussed to put it on the consent agenda, and there was enough energy to have it be pulled from the consent agenda to be discussed.
Yes.
Right.
And this is where we are. It's being discussed because these questions were still lingering in the community, and there was still concern and still uncertainty. And so the Coalition for Low-Income Housing, the Charlottesville Low-Income Housing Coalition sent us a letter last week. They presented to HAC at the onset of our HAC meeting last Wednesday, and HAC felt a responsibility to respond to that letter in either showing support or not support.
Full agreement.
Right.
Well, we're not in full agreement.
Right,
And
we're
we're
not
not
in full agreement.
Right.
But it really is an if you were going to entertain
But we
putting this
didn't
stuff
say
in.
that that's what we were, like, so this essentially muddies up the water. This convolutes a lot of it because you bring about a document in which we didn't even say we wanted to go down that route, and then we've literally taken 10 to 15 minutes to discuss a hypothetical that we never said we wanted.
But there's a reason it was brought off the consent agenda, because it just seems there wasn't
So I
broad
have a
support.
very basic question. So
Okay.
that the ordinance before us does it reflect all the conversation and changes that we had agreed to at the last time we saw it? Because that's what should be only the changes in that
Correct.
document.
And
And if there's been new things added since that conversation on council, then that does create problems.
Right, and I think that, and to be clear, is there are not new things added. That letter was in response to the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition's letter to clarify, if you are going to entertain what they are saying, we would like you to entertain this.
Oh, so that'd be additional changes tonight based
If-
on that.
If the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition persuades you to start making these changes to the ordinance, then we need to have a conversation about that. That's the order, that's the order in which it would proceed. It is not a suggestion
Right.
that you start with making those changes. It's if that is, we have already thought about some of this.
Okay.
Agreed. The
That's
difference in the two
could
is
we-
they sent theirs a week ago, we get yours tonight.
I understand that.
And I'm not trying to like make you feel bad or like belabor that point, but I just want you to clearly understand that's a big distinction, even in the last point that you just made.
But their
Mr. Bowling,
input
could-
still was to change the ordinance.
Right.
Okay.
Their letter was still to change the ordinance.
They wanted to.
Could I suggest that
Go ahead.
council decides, among Mr. Bellamy's point, that
Right.
we make a decision right now about whether we want to do that?
Right.
Because a lot of this hinges on whether we want to open it up. So if we do or if we don't. So let's decide now if we do, and if we don't, then,
If we want to open it up to more amendments?
yeah.
Okay.
Because we're talking about both things here at once.
Right.
Can we just do that? Can we do that?
Go right ahead, but to finish answering your question, no, there are no changes except for the granular ones of this word should be that word, but not substantive there.
I think more amendments, but I haven't heard yet why this is the next best necessary tool from anyone who has presented. In the book, Frank Alexander, who's supposed to be the person who knows all things about land banking, it says the future of land banking, the dream is that one day in the not too distant future, we can realize that land banks and land banking are no longer necessary. When we as a people firmly embrace the proposition that we are stewards of the land with the responsibility for the land itself, then the day will have come. When we treat both people and land with equal respect, we will no longer impose the cost of our activities on our neighbors and will no longer view land as a disposable commodity. So we are saying we are at a place in this town where we are ready to do this right, and then we're coming up with a tool that we're saying is the next best thing to create affordable housing, but then we're not even in a place where we want to define affordable housing in a way that we should be talking about affordable housing, but we're saying that this is the tool to create that affordable housing.
Mayor Walker, may I say something?
Basically.
Ms. Kelly did a really neat matrix.
I have
where
that.
And it's page 16, where the question is asked, what is their role and effectiveness in creating affordable housing, and what can be done to make them more effective? And that was between the land bank all the way down. So the land bank is what that says. Using a range of special powers such as its ability to acquire and hold property tax-free, clear title and back taxes, and dispose of property intentionally, not just to be the highest bidder. They may, for example, demolish obsolete structures or remediate soil, give side lots to neighboring owners, donate land to nonprofits, or assemble properties for larger development. None of the other entities can go ahead and demolish obsolete structures and remediate and prepare the land for sale to a nonprofit without
But it's
all
not
those
just
costs.
to a nonprofit.
Well, we
It
can,
doesn't-
we can make that as part of the bylaws, as I understand. And it's also, we've made it, it's in the ordinance that is to be used for affordable housing. But as a tool, it is pretty unique in the sense that we understand this distinction, that it can do all those things, get the land, clean it up, and then flip it to a nonprofit housing provider or the CRHA. That's a huge, huge savings in
But it's
cost.
It's not just, the only options are not a CRHA or a non-profit housing provider. There are other options.
Like what would they be looking at?
It says it in here.
Well,
And before we even got to this point, because Ms. Rice and I had this conversation at the end of last week, knowing that we had some of these things were churning, we are going to have a work session around affordable housing early June, in which case it might be the more appropriate time for us to really work through some of these issues. Because my fear is obviously a lot of work has been done in this to date, but at the same time there's a lot of public engagement, and I just don't want us to get to a point where we're then, at the end of this, we have an outcome that not anyone is really enthusiastic about.
Yeah, I'd like to just say two things. One, that it's very frustrating, challenging, addressing public expectations around affordable housing creation in a city of our size. So we actually have, like the study recently showed, we have significantly increased the pace of creation of affordable housing. And we did the 2 developments. There were 78 units and 35 last fall after the 12th. But if you look at the public, or just even actually, it's not about credit, it's about actually the work that goes into the actual creation of affordable housing in a city this size. It's usually in the dozens. So this, for all the work that's going to go into this in a city of 50,000 people, a lot of the victories will probably be in the dozens of units that are created. A lot of the time, land banks are put into place in cities of 500 or 1 million people, 500,000. I mean, many times the scale, where you have whole neighborhoods that are, or whole blocks that are blighted. So I just want the public to understand what this really is going to do is probably going to achieve victories like we have recently, 35, 50, 20 units here or there, and it'll be really important work in a city of our size. What would change that is if this was done with the county, collaboratively with the county, because then you're in a totally different terrain, because then you're looking at a 200,000 person metropolitan unit that's an entirely different thing. But anyway, so I agree that it would be, I'm worried about, I want the public's expectations to be set at the right level for what this will do in terms of actually moving the needle on affordable housing, and they should look at what's been done recently, that we have created more housing.
well, and that does bring up a good point, though, because if we're so restrictive as to who the land bank can sell this to, I'm wondering, could the land bank then sell it to a fountainhead? could it sell it to a EYA or Jonathan Rose? These are developers that specialize in low-income housing development, but they're private. So, and the way the language that we're seeing,
And a lot of time, they end up being the most expert ones to develop.
well,
because
and,
they've-
but
they've got a
but
system
in the
place.
language we're seeing, this is being restricted strictly to CRHA on one version, and then it was broadened to CRHA and our local nonprofit housing providers. And is the goal to make sure we generate as much affordable housing as we can? Is the goal to have it with certain entities? That is something that I am wondering about.
So I'll just be frank. One of the points on which I have consistently disagreed with HAC is that the city has the ability under this enabling legislation to say, for example, the only person the land bank can deal with is the housing authority, or the only person that the land bank can get property from or sell property to under a right of first refusal is the city. The land bank we're not setting up a committee or a partnership or that sort of thing with the city. It's going to be an independent corporation with its own governing body. And that governing body has a full ability to decide who it wants to acquire property from and sell to. That's part of what makes a land bank flexible, if flexibility is what you're looking for. That being said, there's absolutely no reason why, once it was formed, it could not enter into partnerships with CRHA, with the city, with whoever it wanted to. But just to be clear, the point that I've consistently disagreed with HAC on is that this ordinance can contain a provision that ties the hands of an independent legal entity in that way. The sole function of your ordinance is to say, we want a land bank in the city, and the enabling legislation lets you say certain things in the ordinance. But beyond that, once you form it, once you appoint people to the board, and once you establish priorities for the uses to which land can be put when it's sold, not who it can be sold to, but what it can be used for,
Okay.
then you're done.
Right.
Then you're done, in my opinion. And that's why this is all really difficult. It feels like you want to retain a lot of control. You want to, you're trying to create something else that's going to have similar powers or similar goals that you have, and nobody's happy with it right now.
Just to, one point of clarification, Ms. Robertson's actually been quite persuasive to the members of the HAC on how how it should be structured, which is why our recommendation was that it be as flexible as it could be, and that language should not appear in the ordinance in general. And if and only if you wanted to go down the road to do that, we would very much like you to use the language that we wrote, but we were not recommending that necessarily appear in the final in the ordinance, that it should be part of the charging document, and just to say, oh, bylaws, please pay it, And to your point about the nonprofit or profit, yes. We think that the land bank should be directed should be directed by council to say, you should really write your bylaws so that you should first look to nonprofits first. But take that into your calculus. But do what is best to further affordable housing. That's your job. And if that's a private,
And that the problem.
But you figure that out. But your board is a public-facing board. This is a community-facing board, and based on the information in front of you, the thing that really makes this a very distinctive board and a very distinctive entity is that the board is composed almost exclusively of community members, and that is not just the way. That is not the way land banks are generally. That is. I don't want to say it's unique to Charlottesville, but it's very strong that essentially it's Mr. Jones and one other city employee and 7 other people on the board are members of the community.
Could council talk about this on our own? Is that now that we're
Happily step away.
not to thank you, but I'm there. If we could try to.
So, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, so I like Heather's suggestion.
So, and your suggestion
I
was?
think that there's still more adjustments that need to be fielded and then understood. And so I was just saying that if Paige has identified that we have this work session that's in early June that's focused on affordable housing, I want to make sure that we get this right. I mean, we're so close to here, and I just feel like there's enough people that are weighing in and are really passionate about this. And I think there's some subtleties. I just don't think that we're going to get there tonight. Personally.
And I hope part of that discussion is centered around whether this is
We even need it. Yeah.
a tool.
Well, I mean, I just want to just get out there that we're going to need a whole quiver of arrows. This is one of many tools. And I think that's, and I wish there was some way that we could expedite the creation of our housing production plan. As I understand it, that's not going to happen until next year. But in the meantime, we're building the plane while flying, it feels like. But we have got to, what I like about, I mean, we have 12 small area plan areas. We've only gotten 2 done. There's hundreds of acres available of asphalt in old, underutilized buildings, and we're not doing anything with them. We're not aggressively going after them. That's what we have in Charlottesville. So I'm looking for tools that are going to let us fix that stuff up and flip it so that it can be turned into something usable and necessary. So that, I'm just letting everyone know that I think this seems to be the most flexible, nimble tool that we've seen that at least gets the land moving and in processing so it can be repurposed for the social good, which is affordable housing.
But we keep talking about affordable housing, but there isn't even the interest to define what we mean by affordable.
Right.
Well, that's going to happen on June 4th.
But even for something like this, like personally, if we're talking about affordable housing, like it would need to be broken down by AMI. And if you're talking about like it has to have a group where we want to target it, with a starting point be 40% AMI and below, to ensure that the individuals who are very much so needed to be able to have access to this land, the land trust.
And how and good, I mean, and then it's got to meet.
Exactly.
It's got to have a balance sheet and be actually developed and be something that will be developed. And you see how difficult that is in a city where and that's why a lot of the time you have to go with these experienced developers that are using the tax credits that are like Riverbend is. Yeah.
Let's table it then.
My point of view is it's just any. Might be like a hard, like really late night truth, but I just think any affordable housing strategy that doesn't deal with the county right in it is mostly just it's just shadow boxing. So it's just
And that's a long-term process.
It's a much bigger thing.
I know we got to do it all.
Right.
At different stages. And it doesn't seem like anybody can make a decision tonight, but I really do think that hamstringing this thing right now, so the land bank's going to wind up holding the land or only giving it if there's no one that can make all the numbers work because we've artificially set this restriction, because every pro forma is different. Every combination of units is going to be different based on what they can pencil out. And how do we know that? I think we'll have a ballpark picture of what our focus and priorities are going to be after we have a chance to sink our teeth into the Partners for Economic, PES services, economic services. Anyway, the Anita Morrison's work. This is just a tool to get the raw material that is needed to turn into housing. It's not the development itself.
So even that raw material, what does that list look like? So for someone to have sat at a table and thought that land banking was a good idea, they have to have a list of what they think they're going to land bank. what does that look like in Charlottesville? Whose property are we talking about? We're not talking about, when you're talking about abandoned.
So a great example would be the IGA on Cherry Avenue. But we've been, the head of the Fifield Neighborhood Association, there's been probably 4 or 5 different proposals to use that property, but there's lots of difficulties with it that are very specific, including increasing cost of land. So to actually make that work and to get the financing to buy it and then develop it in such a way that it will
And then you gotta clean it up.
make sense and clean it up and deal. Yeah, it's very complicated. And that's one of the reasons that it's been sitting in. It would be great if the city could buy it and develop it. I mean, that would be a great thing, or if the land bank could. But there are reasons that have to do with the challenges that and that's the thing in this city. So it's different from like Detroit or Richmond, where you have large, or Petersburg, large areas where there really are very cheap, and you really do need an entity who can move the dial and like get it off and get a large tract, and really that's just not the deal in the city, in the 10 square miles of the city of Charlottesville. There aren't like significant tracts where you just get it all at once and then you get a few hundred units out of it.
Okay, so Lisa, what, do we need to vote?
No, you don't.
Okay.
So I guess this is
You
being
want to defer
tabled.
it further.
Do you all want to?
A lot of work has gone into
I
this,
just-
and we know that.
I just feel.
But they're too far apart. Like, we need more time. I mean, I agree there's been a great deal of work, but we're not all where we need to be. Neither the Hack Click or any of the other entities are, in my opinion, on the same page and trying to find something in which we can move forward, as well as city staff. So, like, I don't see what's wrong with us taking a couple more weeks to try to bring this together. I just really don't feel comfortable, especially just seeing something like here tonight right now.
And for the work session, it can be properly framed, where it's like, hey, council, do you want to reopen this up to amendments? If so, yes, then go down this path, and here's the amendments that you have to do, the 5 amendments, and we can basically know beforehand, and we can go on and ready to knock that out like 10 other things that we want to knock out at a work session.
And there'll be other topics to talk about too that
Lots of
night.
other things.
So what is this gonna be, like a 3 or 4 hour session?
No. Sorry.
3 hours.
Only 3 hours.
3 hours.
You love me.
So, but it does need to be very structured, and we can't be getting information the night of.
Yes.
I mean, so that's a given, like, I think Albemarle County, they've got to get everything a full week in advance, so we have a chance to read it. We can't get stuff late at night.
Okay, so Lisa, what do we need to do now?
You can just defer it.
Okay.
It's not over.
We could do an
Thank
all-nighter
you.
with the work session.
Stop.
All right, so deferred. All right, so moving on, construction impacts on bike, pedestrian, and enforcement.
I hope to soon be joined by the subject matter expert. I'm Mike Murphy, Assistant City Manager. I imagine Mr. Brennan Duncan, the traffic engineer, will soon join me. I'm going to make some introductory comments about the background on this and what we're bringing before you this evening. Essentially, about a year ago, Councilor Galvin brought together a group to talk primarily about West Main Street and some impacts that were felt there. And a list was generated of things that the city staff would be working on. And that evolves into this update tonight, where we are looking at, I would say, 6 broad areas that staff has worked on and is making additional suggestions or recommendations to council for follow-up at this time. And it does cut across departments in NDS, Parks and Rec, the city attorney's office, and the police department. And, the first area is really construction site compliance. And the way the city is resourced right now, we are really in a call and response mode. We don't have individual staff who have the sole responsibility of being out inspecting sites, and that's why you see that one of the recommendations is to resource that differently going forward. Also in this first area, you'll see that the city attorney's office has done some research, and we don't believe that the General Assembly has given the express authority or conferred it to localities for street closing as far as levying fines, or one of the questions that was asked early on. And so there's a different recommendation here to revise the temporary street closure permits to include stop work orders and reissue fees, to examine the possibility of misdemeanors being prosecuted, and eventually revising the code. So I'll hit all these things on the high level, and then certainly will answer any questions. The second area was really about notification. What are the tools that we would use for notification? How's the community involved? We talked a lot about something that we had hoped that IT would develop, a map, which is, it's ready. It is used internally by staff already. We would tweak a few things based on a meeting we had with IT preparing for this, so that we could clearly show not just that there was a closure and that you'd have to click on to find out what kind, but then we might color code each type of closure, whether it was street, sidewalk, what have you.
Great.
And certainly at any time we could demo that for council tonight or in the future. Process of notification has changed over time. That is a byproduct of meetings we've had with downtown business owners, with other citizens who are interested in notification. And we think that notification, in fact, does work better. While there is certainly some debate about what the product of different closures has been, including, recently 2nd Street. Notification worked. City staff knew the same day about concerns from business owners and modified the conditions at the work site. We have also implemented a new business corridor team, so to cut across some departments and bring in NDS to make decisions, not NDS, OED and PD to make decisions with the traffic engineer to help improve that process. And we're initially defining the business corridor as the areas we've had the most trouble with these construction impacts, downtown, West Main Street, and the corner. There's been a lot of questions about enforcement and what we do as a police department. Are cyclists and pedestrians safe? There is an active operation which CPD is conducting now. I've given you a list of the specific types of infractions that they're looking at with motorists interacting with cyclists and pedestrians. And one of our recommendations will be to come back in 6 months and talk with you about whether that led to heightened enforcement, or not heightened enforcement, it's already heightened enforcement, but what the product of that was as far as penalties. There's been a lot of talk about the mid-block crossing because of the construction conditions. You are aware that there was a mid-block crossing actually initially installed. There was a ADA, American with Disabilities Act complaint about that. We reevaluated it along with the sight lines and decided that we really couldn't endorse a mid-block crossing there, that the mid-block crossing that is approved when the project is done is in a different location. And so we have few options here now. I know that this continues to be something that folks do. We don't think that we can really hold people accountable for jaywalking in the state of Virginia unless they're impeding traffic or folks are choosing to do this. We've put as much signage out as we can to encourage people to make the crossing back at 8th Street where they ought to do that. And staff really just can't recommend it for liability reasons, but we can certainly talk more about that. There's some questions about what MySeaville does and how that would help with planning and coordination, if at all. MySeaville, I think we gave an update on as part of the manager's work plan that you're discussing. In the first 4 weeks, we had 150 to 160 work requests that came in. And I think about 85% of those were closed during that same time period. But it really is a request model. It's not for the planning and coordination piece. And so things like the business district team, things like adding maintenance of traffic and then traffic circulation plans early on at the site planning process, those are the improvements we're making to improve coordination. And then there's some question about where this sits, and certainly understand and agree that with the duties and responsibilities of the new assistant city manager, that this fits with that position. It's Mr. Jones' intent to advertise that by the end of this week. And in the meantime, as it cuts across several departments that I oversee, I will continue to shepherd it through the process. We have a number of recommendations that, since this originated with, a request for an update and an email from an individual counselor that was endorsed by you all, we just need some input about where to head from here. And we have some recommendations about, directing staff to revise policy, getting the pulse about whether you would consider having somebody whose sole responsibility it is to be out checking sites for compliance, whether you would endorse investigating levying different fees on developers when they're out of compliance. The criminal prosecution, is that something that council would entertain? Obviously, the code modification, if you're willing to do those other things, that would come part and parcel with that. If there's more that you want to know about notification protocol, or you want to see the outward-facing map, certainly we can do that. We'd like to have CPD come back in October, November, make a presentation to you. And then, staff doesn't really see that we can put in that mid-block crossing, but we'd like to confirm that council supports that decision. So, questions for Mr. Duncan or myself? Did he really not? Oh, there he is, all the way back there. Yeah, we can certainly take any questions at this time.
If I may. First, thank you for pulling this together, and thank you for your list of recommendations. It really does help start framing this, and I want all of them, personally, but I do want to add a few things based on what I've gotten from the public, what we've all gotten by the public. But I must say with that, I was just on my bike just last week, and there was an elderly woman weaving through the traffic trying to cross West Main Street just east of the Standard. And that's where that path used to be. And how is that more safe than, or more of less concern than not doing, than putting one in that may be not in compliance strictly? It was just, it's frightening. And every time I'm on that road, I see stuff like that, but that was the first time it was a senior citizen literally toddling around the cars. And that's the location, because that's where the construction isn't happening. So I just find it really hard to believe that there is no solution other than to let someone get hit.
Well, as we put it in a response today, I mean, the only solution, as it seemed by staff, is to create a wall back at 8th Street to make it even more clear that you shouldn't go any further and force people to cross there where it's properly marked. We're not going to be able to provide access to anything that's in between, and that's why it can't be really an acceptable solution. A choice is made by the pedestrian to advance beyond the point where they're told not to go. Right?
But if human behavior is saying that this is what people are doing, that's where they're crossing for whatever reason, we're just going to say, because you're disobeying us, you can get hit?
I don't.
I'm struggling with this.
Yeah, I would love for you to speak, Brendan.
So the issue comes down to liability again. If the city installs it, the site distance is not there. So right now, if people decide to cross, they're doing so at their own risk. Again, it's not against the law in the state of Virginia to cross the road if you're not impeding traffic. If they decide if there's no cars coming, they want to cross because it's easier, that's on them. If we put in a crosswalk, then we are directing people, this is a place you are supposed to cross. In doing so, if they get hit in the crosswalk, they could come back and sue the city. It doesn't meet the guidelines, and therefore we would be at risk of being found liable. That's really, why our recommendation is not to put it in here.
That seems like a better outcome, and to design it really carefully with like a maximum. I mean, it's a really exceptional situation. I agree. I mean, it's super alarming when you're going down there and it's really riding a bike or walking. It's just a really unusual. That's why we're hearing about it. And so it seems like it begs an unusual answer. Maybe it involves more extra signage and wayfinding and all that other stuff. But it's like when you enter that block, like the city is taking extra care of you, like we do with the extra, crosswalks on Ridge Street. I mean, where there's extra lights and signs and it just does. It feels like kind of a Wild West when you enter that block.
Because the distance of that block is so long.
Yeah, it's a long block,
very long.
and it's
There's
a
no other way
huge
to get
building,
across
and
it.
it just kind of like and that's not intuitive at all. And it's like you're just kind of. It's a very wide street too, so it's hard, it feels wide because you're over the bridge.
The only thing currently on that block that people can access is the parking lot from 8th Street. There's nothing past the bridge other than the parking lot. Those are the only people that really need to be crossing there, are the people who are parking. A lot of them work at UVA, and I understand that it's more inconvenient to walk in the opposite direction back to 8th Street, but there's no businesses. There's no businesses on that side of the bridge. There's a few just past 8th Street before you get to the bridge, and that's really why it's
you go
not
to 8th
physically
Street,
closed there.
That's the way to at West Haven. That's the way to 10th and Page. I mean, right? Isn't that when you get over the bridge?
It's not until after you pass the standard at that point. You get to 10th
Well,
Street.
that's where I'm seeing that people are crossing and then going east.
You're seeing them cross right after the
Right.
construction.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
To get to the parking lots that are right there on the west side of the bridge.
Well, I don't know exactly what their ultimate destination was.
I'm saying if there's any other, if they wanted to continue down West Main Street, they can continue on the south side and cross at 8th. Currently, there's.
Do we have signage on that south side that identifies that there is a crossing ahead? Because I agree with you, there's nothing exciting to go to, but unless I know, I just out of habit. I mean, I've run it many times, and you want to kind of get over to the side that you want to get on sooner versus later. And I'm just trying to understand, is there anything that would let people know at the point of where they're making that decision after the construction that crossing is
I mean,
coming.
they don't generally make sidewalk open signs, but
Could the city purchase an extra insurance policy in case, we're
Or should
taking
the-
extra
the
liability
contractor?
and just, and try to design, again, to create a crosswalk and we just would deal with the risk somehow because
I mean,
it's-
the other issue was the ADA and the bicycle, that's kind of what brought it to our attention. Because originally, we had said, yeah, there's a desire line here.
Right,
We're
right.
gonna put it in. When the ADA concern came in of, providing the ramps and the ramps being in the bike lanes and the bike lane, people having to merge with traffic, we reevaluated it and looked at it again and actually looked at the site distance and we're like, no, it doesn't work here, so we're gonna remove it. So that, we're still, even if we put in, the crosswalk, we're still gonna have the ADA issue and the bike issue. So, I mean, yes, we could provide a crosswalk with ramps, but now the bikes are gonna have to move back into the lane of traffic on both sides, not just the westbound bike
how
lane.
long is this gonna go on for? How many more months?
I don't know.
So when they start a project like this, how do we manage expectations for how long it will take? I mean, there's
I
got to
mean,
be,
we generally, I would have to look. I mean, I'm sure that in the pre-construction meeting, they gave us a timetable for.
and if they
how
don't
long
meet that timetable, what kind of repercussions
they
are
get.
there?
there's
Because I
currently-
feel like
there's
that's
currently
a
none.
common theme we've been
Yeah,
hearing,
yeah.
not just here, but on
Right.
Water Street and a couple spots, Second Street.
It goes on and on and on,
Yeah.
and there's no penalty. And I do think we do really want to tighten up the penalties, at least I do, and hold the contractors accountable for the impacts they're making on our public streets. But I also, it's become clear to me that, yeah, as you pointed out, Mr. Murphy, this has been a call and response. This is not taking a step back and looking kind of at a bird's eye view as to, oh, we've got a project here, they're coming online here, they're gonna be getting offline there. So there really does need to be someone orchestrating this
And we're-
process.
We're doing that a lot more now than when I started in this position. It's been a year and a half that the standard was, in place. The plans for that were kind of in place before I even started. It's been a long process with the current projects that are getting ready to start, the Blue Moon and the Quirk Hotel, that are almost directly opposite of each other. I've been in contact with both contractors. I've been upfront, I've been clear. They are providing, alternate pedestrian access on their side of the street.
Okay.
So they're not going to be able to just, divert traffic to one side and kind of make this S-snake movement back and forth across West Main. That's happening now. It wasn't in the past.
So
Thank you.
That's very good. So that means that you're essentially acting like this development site inspector?
No, this is on the planning side of it. The site inspector would come down to, once, all of these projects get implemented in the field, going out there and making sure that, their signs are right, that, the contractor, some of these stay in place for a long period of time. Others are a week long, and then they're in and out. Some of them are, once or twice a week, or 1 or 2 days a week, and then they're out. So when you come to those, we don't have the time to go out there. We might have a plan in place, but we don't have the staff hours to go out and check every single one of those to make sure that they're in compliance with ADA, that they've got the right signs up, that you name it. I mean, we can plan everything to your delight, but the implementation of it is really what this inspector is for.
Well, and on long-term projects, we have enough experience to know now that they fall in and out of compliance, right? We have to go and
Every
say, no, this is not in compliance. They get it right, and then we get a call, and 2 weeks later, it's not the way that they fixed it, right? And barricades have been moved, and so the recommendation for the position is about ensuring that compliance stays at the sites, right? That it doesn't change day to day or week to week.
Well, could it double up with the ADA coordinator? I mean, why do we need, because then there was also the reserve for the new planner. It seems like there's like
The
three
ADA
new.
coordinator has significant responsibilities in policy and planning, and while the most recent person did a lot of going out and doing field work, that was only because of the demand, and really, we think that probably that's a smaller part of their job. We're growing, and we're going to be under construction in many places for quite a long time. I think that it would be beneficial to have somebody who monitors those sites.
I envision this inspector would be, out in the field 4 to 6 hours, in the office 2 to 4 hours a day. If they're not in the field, they can be, and we can pull it up, but, inputting the permits into the map, kind of doing that,
So I guess I'm just curious as to why this didn't come up during the budget sessions, for additional staff, or was it because I just asked these questions and all of a sudden it became clear that we needed this? Because it seems like these issues have been building and building and building, and I'm glad we're getting a handle on them, but it does seem a little overwhelming, maybe the same reaction you had with the 100,000. I'm having the reaction of like, oh boy, an ADA coordinator and a site inspector, and we've got this planner in the wings, and I've been wanting this. We've all been wanting this ACM for
Not
over a
all.
year. Well, that was before you got on. The three of us did it in the previous council, so it was approved for FY18. And if we had that position in place, this kind of logistical issues might be working out in a different way, but now I just feel like we're accruing more staff, and I'm not sure where the end game is. So that's just my reservation about adding more staff on top of this problem, when I think is it a matter of just restructuring the way business is being done to figure out who can do this job, who's not doing it now, instead of just adding and adding and adding.
What department?
I guess it would
Neighborhood
be
Development
Neighborhood Development Services.
Yeah, so we already have established that they need more staff, right?
Yeah, but this is new on top of that.
But there was a position from the efficiency study where it was kind of open, right?
There's one
Where-
position that, there's some discussion about what that position would be. Would it be a planner? Would it have other roles? It was not a discussion over a site supervisor. I think what staff is saying is that the expectations have increased because the growth has increased in our community. And we have significant number of projects that are already happening or on the books, more yet to come. And that it will take having someone who can lay eyes on these sites on a daily basis to reach the level of expectation of the council and the public when it comes to this type of enforcement. And then in addition, the other things that we had talked about this evening about having the teeth in the enforcement side as well. If you want someone who is out there doing that, we need another body to do it, is what we're saying to council.
But this is all still for consideration at a future meeting. So this is kind of like the introductory
Absolutely.
piece.
Right. I mean, and the other thing I want to bring up too, and it's something that I see a business owner here, and there's also been issues with what are the consistent protocols for dealing with on-street parking and traffic restrictions in general, because that doesn't necessarily come up under your temporary street closing permit process. But there does seem to be the need for more protocols about when do you take parking spots off the street, when do you put them back on, what's the notification for that? And there seems to have been some confusion about that. I did hear resoundingly that everyone likes this receipt of notification of closure provision. So I guess that's still going to be staying in there. And then the other thing was the kind of an orientation program for all the stakeholders and all the people that are involved and impacted. How do people get made to understand the procedures, the protocols? Is it you're supposed to just know to go to a website, or is there an orientation? And I'm thinking that that's the kind of proactive step that Elmont County took before Rio Roads interchange went in, for example. Well, we've got so much construction on these streets now. There's a critical mass that people need to know what, especially the businesses, what the impact's going to be on that whole corridor. I mean, if anything in the plans, anyone's thinking on that score, because it does mean that people would be able to be discussing this. They could add their comments and suggestions instead of just kind of like things change and they don't even know why.
I would say Brendan can certainly add that outreach right now is somewhat localized to where the impact is. But I think it's certainly an important consideration as we look at moving forward with moving into an active phase on the West Main Street, right?
Right.
Because the impact will be significant and will impact the entire corridor.
And then the other thing was to make sure that we have sidewalk and bike lane clearances really understood and maintained. And that keeps coming up, that they get closed and they get open, the signs get put in the way. Is that all part of that enforcement thing with the site inspector?
Yep.
And that site inspector's gonna have to be able to like slap them, they're gonna have to have the ability
We
to
would-
slap them with a violation right then and there.
Right, so we would, more than likely, we have this process with our stormwater utility type of stuff. We would give them a notice to comply and a certain time frame to resolve that. And then we would go re-inspect and see if they've made those things. And then if not, I think per Lisa's thing, we'd basically pull their permit and make them reapply with a reapplication fee. That would be their effective fine, would be a reapplication fee. But I don't think we want to go around and just, pull permits because a pedestrian can walk up and move a sign. So, we want somebody out there that's looking at it and say, hey, this is your problem, please fix it. You've got, 8 hours to fix it or 24, depending on what the severity, if it's a sign that needs to be moved, it, should be done as soon as possible. If it's, a Jersey barrier that needs to get moved, it may require a little bit bigger piece of equipment that needs to move it. So we might give them, 24, 48 hours, something like that. But yeah, that would be kind of the process for that.
All right.
Okay, so just so that you know what's going on, I would just like, and this is no motion, this isn't a resolution or anything, but just, I personally agree with these recommendations, but I do want to push the envelope on this West Main Street crossing. I don't know if there's anyone else, if no one else is interested. I've just heard it over and over and over again. It's a very long distance between crossings. The other thing is getting a handle on this on-street parking and traffic restrictions.
Can you clarify that? 'Cause
And I think Ms. Reichfeld was the one that brought that up on the Second Street, there was these long-term, restrictions on parking, and no one really knew when it was going to end, and it started hampering.
I mean, the Second Street was pretty clear, the permit was for 30 days. I mean, originally the whole road was supposed to be closed, including the parking for that amount of time, and we were told that we absolutely could not close that by the businesses. So, a roof needs to get redone.
Right.
They have to set up and stage somewhere. So, we're especially in a downtown area, there's limited space. Do we want them on the mall? Do we want to, we have restrictions.
And maybe
as to-
what I recall is this mainly was communication, that it was a communication problem. Am I right?
No, the problem was, the building they were working on wasn't even where they had the construction site. It was across the street and directly in front of my business, in the loading zone. And there were, they used one of the spaces that we use for our trash, which we had received no information on where to dump our trash or where to take our cans. And then another one was used as simply as a parking spot for the construction workers, and that one spot took up the entire storefront of my store. I was the only business on that entire part of the road.
So how can we avoid that kind of thing? How can we avoid that disproportionate impact on particular, I mean, that's
Or was
just, I
it-
guess, the bigger
Was it
issue.
addressed once it was brought to the city's attention?
The street closure was.
Mm-hmm.
The parking impacts are kind of what they were. I mean, they needed a
Until
dumpster
the
there,
30
they had a
days
forklift there.
expired.
And, you know, they had vehicles that, you know, it was one construction vehicle for, you know, 15 guys that they had up on the roof, which I don't feel is,
Across the street from the actual building they were.
there's no parking on the side of the street that the actual building was on, though.
There's no parking on where they were either.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I just, anyway, and then just some kind of an orientation for businesses before stuff happens and residences, just because we don't want to have these surprises. And it's just got to be much more of a partnership, you know, instead of everything kind of devolving into a anxious, frustrated kind of relationship with the city and the contractor and the residents and the businesses.
And I think
So-
the point about having a wider footprint for those conversations makes a lot of sense, especially with the construction that we're going to see on West Main Street and Water Street in the near
Street,
future.
Preston.
That it's got to be the entire corridor that we're talking to, and especially for downtown with Water Street with the Downtown Business Association. So I completely agree with that.
And after that particular incident, you know, we brought on economic development and Parks and Rec for the special events and stuff to review any permit that's going to be over 48 hours. Just within the last month, we've kind of set that up. We've got, you know, the ADA coordinator whenever that position gets refilled, as well as the bike and pedestrian coordinator. So again, we're trying to take proactive steps to mediate some of that. But
So then the last thing I'll just say is this, when this comes back again, whenever you bring back this package to us, I guess, I know we've got one timeline is the 6 months for the police report. I'm not sure if that's when the whole thing would be brought back to us, but I do want to see more definition of this development inspector, the site development inspector, relative to their role with the ADA coordinator, relative to their role to some other pieces. It's just still a new animal to me. I understand the need for it, but I don't understand why we couldn't reconfigure things in the department to figure out who could do that. And I could be certainly proved wrong, but this is just a new position that we've just heard about, and we just passed the budget, you know, last month. And, you know, that's why I'm a little concerned.
We can certainly bring that back to council.
So on all of these recommendations, we should pursue all of those and bring them back. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You jinxed it.
Thank you.
All right, other business, request for allocations for the Equal Justice Initiative community trip.
Sorry.
Good morning.
Yes.
So members of our community have just returned from Ghana, which was a community building trip of learning together. And we are hoping this summer to have another such experience for members of our community, in this case, the Charlottesville Community Civil Rights Pilgrimage, which will be a journey into our past. In 2016, Council charged the Blue Ribbon Commission with changing the narrative on race. We will be, with this trip, memorializing Mr. John Henry James, an African-American man from our community who was a victim of racial terror lynching. With this trip, we seek to enfold the suppressed memory of local racial terror lynching back into our collective narrative of our past. So 2 months ago at the March 19 council meeting, I reported on the timeline for acquiring our city's Equal Justice Initiative lynching memorial module and historical plaques. Council asked Dr. Andrea Douglas of the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center and myself to undertake the necessary steps. Following is an update of where we stand to date. Stakeholder meetings. Dr. Douglas and I have conducted numerous meetings with community stakeholders and organizations so that a range of constituencies are aware of this project. There are a number of possibilities for participating in events associated with the lynching memorial. Co-sponsors and supporters, we've garnered the City of Charlottesville, the Jefferson School, Charlottesville City Schools, University of Virginia Office for Diversity and Equity, University of Virginia Vice Provost for Academic Research, UCARE, which is the University and Community Action for Racial Equity, and other community organizations as well.
Red Light Management.
Pardon me?
Red Light Management.
I have not heard anything officially.
Red Light Management.
Well, okay, thank you. Last week after these meetings, the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center Facebook page posted a registration page for reservations. Those who demonstrate financial need, which is below AMI of $47,000 a year, may also apply by submitting copies of 2 W-2s and being eligible for full travel scholarship. Assistant Manager, City Manager Mike Murphy, is he still here? Oh, there he is, all right. Is in contact with his Albemarle County counterpart in order to have the Equal Justice Initiative process placed on the agenda for their early June meeting of the Board of Supervisors, where Dr. Douglas and I will present information to the supervisors, possibly with some contact from some of you on the dais here to get them a heads up. This from stakeholders now segueing into place. This Friday, Dr. Douglas and I will meet with the current property owners of the lynching site to request their assistance with the logistical matters of soil sample collection on July the 7th and the eventual placement of the historical plaque on that site. Schools. Dr. Douglas and I have confirmed with Dr. Atkins, Superintendent of Schools, and Charlottesville High School Principal Irizarry, that in early June there will be a teacher professional development session with historian Kevin Levin on Civil War history, the history of Charlottesville's and the history of Charlottesville's Confederate monuments. Council's $15,000 allocation that was already designated for adding diversity-oriented public school curriculum is what we plan to tap for the teacher professional development session in June. Incentives for teachers include earned hours toward professional recertification with the Virginia Education Association and a travel scholarship on the EJI Community Pilgrimage in July. Participating teachers would then be prepared to teach students as they prepare for the February 2019 EJI essay contest and to serve on the evaluation jury for the essay contest, with the winner to be announced next Liberation and Freedom Day, March 3rd, 2019. Which brings me to funding. The cost per traveler is around $1,500. Our goal is to take 2 tour buses, or about 110 travelers, to Montgomery, Alabama, for a total cost of around $125,000. We're planning our goal is to have 30 travelers from Charlottesville High School, 15 students and 15 teachers, and 20 low-income travelers on the buses. The cost of those 15 CHS students and 15 teachers would be about $45,000. The 20 full scholarship travelers would be an additional $30,000. So there's at least $65,000 needed for the fully funded travelers. Dr. Atkins has said the Seaville Public Schools will contribute $10,000. Seems, I'm hopeful that money from the public coffers would seem an appropriate designation for public school students and teachers and low-income travelers, some of whom will be public housing residents. A generous donor has donated the down payment to reserve 2 buses. We are still waiting to hear back from some grant applications and private donors. It is our hope that council will contribute toward this EJI pilgrimage.
This is just remarkable. Thank you.
So I want to, I have a comment. I applaud everything about the lynching memorial and the work and the museum. I have a very hard time getting to spending public money for a trip because of the precedent that it sets. We just had a trip to Africa that a lot of people went on. There are dozens and dozens of hugely worthwhile journeys and trips that I can imagine that would be attached to social justice aims, addressing systemic racism, with many meritorious and sympathetic groups who could go. And the question is, how do we just changed our strategic reserve policy this year, and this is one of the dangers, is that if we go off budget, we raise it to $50,000 where the prior amount was $5,000. That was the comfort. And $5,000 is sort of like, yeah, it can help contribute some funds, but where do we draw the line? How do we not? And your request was for $50,000. And my second
55.
question in the email that we got was for 50.
Wow.
Did that change?
Well, there was some adjustment.
Some adjustment.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. If it's 5, then I would be much more comfortable.
I have a response.
It's 55,000.
65,000 for the fully
The thing
funded.
But the request to the
minus-
city,
Minus
what
the
is-
10 grand from
Right.
the city.
What is the
So
request to the-
55 from the city.
Oh, well, it just,
Right.
yeah, that just
Yeah.
seems,
And,
I-
and if I can respond to that,
Sure.
which, one of the priorities that was identified by council in accepting the BRC's recommendation for getting this EJI memorial, I mean, that this was part of the process for getting this, that is in order to retrieve one's memorial module, part of the deal is you take your soil down there to the site. So this is part of a goal that was already articulated by council to retrieve, to participate in this EJI process, including the essay contest and all that this entails. When this was identified as a priority, this is part of that.
I have another question. There was $10,000 of honoraria that were in the budget. Who do those go to?
To the historians, we're also having medical personnel come along on the trip, and also therapists as well. We're anticipating that this could, be triggering for a lot of people. So we're having a team of 4 therapists and pastors and 2 nurses accompany, and a couple of historians.
But who gets the honoraria?
The aforementioned, there's 4 on the team of therapists and pastors, 2 nurses, and 2 historians.
Okay.
Just like to applaud you for the work. It's been a whole lot that's going into this, and it's very much so appreciated. And furthermore, we have the funds available. I know when we initially sent the email, Mr. Jones, you stated how this could come from a couple of different pots, one being the equity package for $1 million that we set aside, and then there were a couple of other pots, and $55,000 in my estimation. I understand Councilor Signer's concern about being fiscally responsible, but this is, as Dr. Schmidt alluded to, what we discussed when we talked about the moving our community forward in the BRC. And as she also said, a part of the deal, in order for you to get the lynching marker, you have to go and take some of your soil. So I think this is definitely within the purview of what we set out to do, and it's going to have a very much so a lasting impact within our community. So I'm hoping that we can get our colleagues to support.
And if I may, I do see this as definitely meeting the mission of the Blue Ribbon Commission. And we've been talking about monuments and memorials. And I think we've got it in our minds that that's a static gesture or a static act. It's actually, this is a moving, living pilgrimage. The whole event is a memorial. It is a different framing of what memorial is. It's participatory. And I think that's and it's impactful, it's profound. And the fact that it's focused so much on our young people and our educators, it will have lasting ripple effects. And that it is a huge debt that we must pay for this horrific legacy. And it's I just find that it's poetic and it's poignant the way this is working out. So I am in full support of this pilgrimage. And And I do know that we have different pools of money to draw upon. And I think bringing in Albemarle County would be really important. We all have connections to the county. One idea would be have the mayor just write a letter of invite. Please join us in this effort, not even putting any framework around it, but just as a gesture to please be a part of this with us.
That's happened.
That's happened already?
Yeah,
Okay,
and
I'm
there
sorry,
were
I didn't get
also
that.
residents of the county.
Okay,
As I
great.
understand, who also approached the Board of Supervisors.
excellent,
I mean,
excellent.
I don't know if there was follow-through on that. Last I'd heard I don't know that
Okay.
there was, but
All right, well,
but they've been approached. I think some of them are aware of it.
Right.
and they're going to be meeting about this in June?
Supposed to be.
You are gonna present.
Okay.
That's what
Well, we could just all fan out
Yeah.
and talk to them.
Oh, yeah, and Mr. Murphy is in contact with this
Okay.
part there to put that on the agenda.
And I think it's important, just as what we heard earlier, when we're talking about what does the reparations, the give back, like how the healing actually occurs when we charge people with the task of coming up with what part of that looks like, and they present it to us, then it's not necessarily our job to question it. And we have to think about all the years where we have given money to other causes that were hindering and not, helpful. So,
But have we ever given money to a trip like that? I mean, I want to really know, everybody who has a worthwhile trip that is $500 a person should come to us.
no,
It's completely
they
different.
can't, because what we're talking about, we are not, and this is what I keep saying when we are not addressing just last summer. There's a historical legacy of just wrongdoing. So if the Black community comes to you and say, this is the fix, this is part of it, this is part of moving forward, then we can't question every time someone says that this is part of
It's not just the
the
Black
chain.
community. Are only Black residents going to be eligible to go on this trip? I mean, seriously, what's the?
We're talking,
We got the
that
votes.
can't be the
I knew-
case.
And that's not what anyone's saying.
Well, but I'm trying
But
to
you're missing
understand
her point.
how do we decide going forward what the policy is for ad hoc contributions to off-budget cycle to very worthwhile social justice missions? Because this does open that request up. We have a budget process.
I think
it's
one of the
very
things, I think one of
worthwhile.
the things to consider in this situation is that this was a project that the city council said they wanted to do, right? The lynching memorial marker is something that's really important to the council and the city government.
Right.
And you tasked Professor Smith with coming up with some ideas for moving this forward, which she and
This
Dr.
was at the
Douglas
last
had.
meeting. I don't think you were here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
when
that
this
was- yeah.
discussion took place.
And so there's a real connection there. This is not just out of the blue where someone's come up and asked us for funding. This is something that's tied to something that the city council has asked the staff and also folks in the community to work on. And so that's where I think this has a stronger
And I
connection.
apologize, but I'm just asking these questions because we're going to get asked hard questions. We've asked very hard questions about lots of very nonprofits that are working on these same issues, very tough questions about amounts that are fractional. So I'm sorry, Professor Schmidt, I just feel like I have to be able to
No, it's not
defend this
about
going
asking,
forward.
but I think we have to understand that some of the proposals that are gonna come before us, it's just like I missed it last meeting, but there were individuals talking about, the city and payments for, injuries from August 12th. I mean,
Right.
this is not, we can't tie that to what other things might come in the future. We have to base it on those individual circumstances, and we are talking about, we live in a town that was built on the backs of individuals who were enslaved and everything that has come after it to present day. So if we're talking about true healing, we're going to have to say, if other people start requesting, that this is part of what we're working on right now. and be clear and firm with that. This doesn't mean that anyone who has an ask, that we are approving it. If we are saying that we are
And this is,
working
yeah.
on something, then we need to be clear.
I just don't understand why we were so
about that.
cheap then. Like, we only gave $15,000 to the creation of a very tiny grant for the development of a curriculum, and the goal of that was that we would touch every kid going through Charlottesville public schools with race, with the true story of race in Charlottesville. That was the goal, whereas there's 110
Well, wait.
people are going to experience
When
this.
I said 15,000, when I put in the equity package, I didn't hear anyone say like we should put more.
Well,
But
wait,
if
I
there
know,
is more needed,
when you and
then
I met
we
about
have
it,
that
I would have been,
discussion.
Okay.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I
and
That's
just
I mean,
want to get a
what we're talking
sense
about.
of the proportions that we're talking about here.
I understood, but I just think for the sake of this discussion, and it's nearly 12:30, like,
I
is
don't
it
even-
possible for me to ask my colleagues, could we call the question or bring about a vote in regards to?
So to put this on the
No,
consent
it's not.
agenda for,
We need to authorize
Yeah, we'll
funding.
need to put it, we'll
Yeah.
need to put it on.
And
the
I
agenda.
agree to put this on the consent agenda. I believe
Does
in
it-
it. And I and I understand your need for a policy framework, and I clearly believe that this is grounded in a cumulative policy that began with the Blue Ribbon Commission, and then it's proceeded accordingly as we've got more information, more insights, and this is simply putting resources to implement that policy. Pure and simple. This is distinct. It's different. It's not a one-off. It's very much a means of an atonement, but I do believe that it's also something that will have long-term lasting ripple effects because of the people that are going on this pilgrimage. When they come back, it'll spread. So, and then we will have the memorial marker at one of our parks countering the lost cause narrative.
And maybe two. Because Dr. Schmidt, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a deposit that is due in regards to reserving some of the items.
So the registration page went live a few days ago on the Jefferson School Facebook page. And these would be, full paying travelers, yes,
Right.
would need to pay the down payment, which is half of the fee, which is $750 to pay for that. There is also a portion of the registration that is for those who can demonstrate financial need, and there's, another process for that.
Right. No, I'm talking about, so can the committee or whomever is putting this together, can they wait until we put this on a consent agenda on the 4th? Or is there something that needs to happen sooner than that?
Well, we're living in hope, we're waiting to hear back from several grant applications that we've put forward. And so folks have paid a registration. I mean, or what is the question behind the question, I guess?
I mean, so it was my understanding that there were monies that were needed to secure buses or something
No,
like
no,
that.
as I mentioned, a generous donor stepped forward. I think you were at that meeting, were you not? I think last.
I think I was on my phone.
Oh, okay. Yes.
It's
So,
late. It's
well,
late.
at that meeting, yes, a generous
Point funds.
donor came forward spontaneously and offered
I got you.
to do that, and has reserved those buses
Okay.
with their own funds. So.
so what do,
I'd like to make a motion that we put this on the next consent agenda for June 4th.
And to fund $55,000.
Yes,
I second that.
thank you.
and is there a vote?
Will you-
No, it's going to be
No.
on the consent agenda.
Yeah.
But we just agreed to that.
Okay,
which
Thank
we only
you.
needed two.
Thank you
Good night.
very, very much.
good morning.
All right, and you're gonna kill me, but I wanted to bring up one more thing. The Visitors Bureau, we need to determine who among us is going to be representing us. And is it one or two people, Mayor Walker and I were not remembering accurately, that are gonna be part of this future board? Because it's almost June.
It's supposed to be two.
I think
Two?
it's two, but if it's not, then lucky person doesn't have to do it, but
What do we choose to?
choose two, just to be sure. And I
Yes.
guess, I'm not sure if anybody's started sitting down talking
My
about
kids
it
told
with
me
the
I can't be
county.
on any more boards.
I've had some discussions with Mr. Richardson
Oh, great.
about that, and once you've decided who the two will be, we'll include you
Oh,
in those
excellent,
discussions.
great.
Are we gonna do this right now?
We need to decide who this is.
Yeah.
I wanted to do it last time, but Mayor Walker wasn't here, and
I nominate Ms. Hill.
I didn't know we were doing it. I'd like to do it because I've been involved with the whole arts piece from the very beginning.
Sure.
Boom,
The whole thing, but I don't know if that's, I didn't even know that we were.
boom, boom.
Kathy, did you want to do it
Um,
with your history on this, or?
I helped write the,
You did
the
a lot
ordinance
of work on
change,
this.
or not, well, and get the legislation passed. It's not critical, but if there's any, I mean, I don't know, I mean, it doesn't,
So tell me what this board is gonna do again?
it is, to basically provide oversight for the $2 million that we jointly fund the Tourism Bureau. And it would be about directing policy about how it's spent, and it can also feed into the arts programming. So, I mean, and I know you've been very strong on the arts, so that, I can certainly give it up, and I can just be there to, you have a question about something.
If there's
I'm
two
there.
people, is there anyone else interested in doing this? If it is,
Those two.
do you want to do it? Did you want to do it?
I mean, I don't have to do it. I thought you wanted to do it, Heather.
No, I did not say I did. Mr. Bellamy said that. No. I'm open to doing it. I won't say no, but I just know you have a lot more history with this. And did you have any interest, Micaiah?
Not really. I mean, I thought Wes did.
He just said his children won't allow him to go on any more boards.
Don't play it. Thank you, Mayor Walker. I'd like to nominate, actually, I rescind my nomination to Ms. Hill and nominate Ms. Galvin and Mr. Signer, and they can rock, paper, scissors for whoever is the A or 1A and 1B.
Okay, that's fine.
You go first.
Great.
I didn't know he had played anything yet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know. Thank
Okay,
you.
you
So
got it.
I
matters by
can't, I've lost all my coordination. I can't.
matters by the public. Any comments?
Ms.
Oh,
Molly, no?
Bless you, thank you.
All right.
This is a challenging evening.